Today we continue on the series, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. The title for today is A Journey Through the Wall, which I feel like when I say that I need like a deep voice, where it's like journey through the wall, or something, like some kind of theme music like Star Wars or something going on. But it is actually an intense topic. It's kind of a personal topic for a lot of people. And as we begin, a lot of it depends on how you look at life. And so that's where we're going to start. How do we look at life? For some people, life is arbitrary. You just live it, and then you die, and that's it. Some people look at life as simply to enjoy it all. You just take as much pleasure as you can. Some people look at life primarily as a battlefield, right? Good versus evil is all around, and you're constantly battling. Some people in religious circles look at it as life is laid down or foreordained by God, and our job is just to find the exact perfect plan in our life, all right? As we begin, though, I think I look at life quite differently. And I thought it'd be fun to play a short game. So there's only a few of us. All the smart ones got out of Phoenix. So I realize now what that means of all of us that are here. Forgive me for that. Let's move on. Let's play a game. I'm here, so what does that say about me? I would like you, if you can, to finish the phrase. So I'll start it, and you guys finish it. You guys ready? Life is like a box of chocolate. Awesome. Well done there. You never know what you're going to get. Just for fun, there was a couple of other counter quotes that I found online concerning this that I'd like to read to you. American novelist Rhonda Thompson writes, Forrest Gump's mother had a lot of catchy sayings. I never really understood any of them. Life is not like a box of chocolates. Life is more like a wad of gum stuck to the bottom of your favorite pair of shoes. The more you try to clean up the mess, the stickier it becomes. Katy Perry once tweeted, you gotta always mention Katy Perry, right? Life is like a box of chocolates, eat them all, right? It's kind of this pleasure, enjoy life, which is easier, I think, when you're making millions of dollars, right? Life according to Chuck Norris. Life is not, in fact, like a box of chocolates. It's more like a box of Chuck Norris, roundhouse kicking you in the face. And if you receive a box of Chuck Norris, you always know what you're going to get. A Tarantino Gump Fiction version says, life is like a box of chocolates. You open it up, and most times someone's taken a bite out of each and every one. One of my favorites, Bill Mayer, he said, life is not like a box of chocolates. A box of chocolates is all good. I mean, it would be like a box of chocolates if there was an occasional turd, which just reflects the struggles of life, right? Sometimes it's even a chocolate-covered turd where it looks good and you take a bite and you're like, not so nice. What a lot of this reflects is the fact that life is like a journey, full of ups and downs and twists and turns. Some of it's good and some of it is like a turd. It's a difficult time. So as we begin, I want to just share with you the model that Peter Scazzero, who wrote, we're following along the book, of course. The introduction video was Pete Scazzero, and he has a model or stages of growth that we go through, which you can look all up here. A couple things about this. First of all, it's not systematic in that we always go 1 through 6, and it's also cyclical, meaning we go through these many times in our life. It's a part of growth. So when we talk about the wall, for some of us, this is plural. In fact, most of us in here, if we've lived any length of time, have gone through more than one wall. If we've lived long, we've probably gone through 3 or 4 different walls. Walls is a part, going through a wall, journeying through the wall is a part of growth. It's a part of the journey. It's a part of life. It's a difficult time. The sermon that we're going to explore today is going to be slightly different in that we're going to explore different questions. So here's a few of the questions we're going to explore. What is the wall? How do I know I'm at the wall? What's the point of the wall? How do we move through the wall? And what does it look like after the wall? And as we begin, a few observations. A wall happens to everyone. No one is excluded from this. If it hasn't happened in your life, it will happen, but I think for most of us, this is like an obvious statement. Yeah, we get wall being a very difficult time in our life. It's not a sign of weakness, it's not a sign of lack of faith, and it's not a sign of spiritual immaturity. It's a part of growth, walking through, journeying through the wall or a difficult time in our life. So what is the wall? Let's kind of handle that real quick. A wall is a time where we feel disoriented, confused, lost, uncertain. We're struggling, we're suffering, there's a lot of pain. Spiritually speaking, often when we journey through a wall, it's a time where we don't sense God. Where is God? God, are you there? Why is this happening? Sometimes our prayers feel like they're bouncing off the ceiling. Like, are we speaking to someone, something, or are you not there? It's a time where we don't sense that. It's a time of spiritual dryness. Some people, spiritual leaders in the past, referred to it as a dark night of the soul. It's also a way of looking at the wall. How do you know you are at the wall? The wall can happen because of so many different things. A divorce, betrayal, broken friendship, loss of job, loss of health, physical mobility could be put you up into a wall. It could be that you've been yearning for something for so long and it hasn't happened. Maybe it's this deep desire to be married and that hasn't happened. Maybe it's this deep desire to have children and that hasn't happened. Sometimes it's you have this dream and this passion, it doesn't seem to be happening, and you wonder, will it ever happen? That can put you through a wall, up against a wall. Taking care of aging parents. I know there's several in our congregation that are doing that. The role reversal, that is, where you came into life, your parents took care of you, and now you're taking care of them. You're watching them as they're going through the aging process. That can be a very difficult time, right? Last week we talked about the story of Joseph. What does Scripture speak about the wall? Some people look at the Bible as a map. Like the Bible tells us, I grew up in a tradition that said the Bible tells us all of life's questions. It gives us answers to everything, which doesn't take long in life experience to realize, well, there are so many things that the Bible just doesn't seem to be super clear on. In fact, in my tradition, it was the Bible. Bible is basic instructions before leaving Earth, which now looking back seems actually not only untrue, but kind of destructive, right? Here's a bunch of instructions until you get out of here, right? Instead of a map, if we're going to use a metaphor, maybe that the Bible is more like a compass, there to help guide us in some way, right? I did a lot of hunting in Colorado, which I know is kind of hard for some people to view me as a hunter. I'm now a vegan, and so I'm like the farthest thing from that. But we'd go way back and backpack in the wilderness and always checking the compass, right? Because you wanted to know where you were roughly in case you found yourself lost. At least you had some idea, hopefully. Hey, I go north, I go south, or I go east or west. You had some idea what direction. Maybe the Bible is more like that, and it gives us some guidance and direction in our life, if not all of the specifics to everything that happens. So last week, we talked about the story in the life of a man named Joseph in the book of Genesis. So let's revisit that with this idea, this understanding that everyone goes through a wall. And going through a wall or a difficult time is not always the result of doing something bad or wrong. But sometimes, and often, it's the result of growth. It's a natural process, kind of like seasons. Like if we look at these stages like different seasons in our life, they come and go. So let's start with Joseph's great-grandparents, Abraham and Sarah. And I want to invite you to read along with me in the book of Genesis 12. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those that bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So this is the beginning story of a guy named Abraham. Abram in this story, later his name was changed to Abraham, and his wife Sarah. So there's two key things we read. First, Abraham was called to a new land. And second, Abraham was promised that he would be the father to a great nation, that he would have many offspring. And so we read then that Abraham actually did leave his land. He left everything that was familiar with him. He stepped out in faith. He followed whatever it was inside of him that felt called to something new. He left his Social Security. He left his 401k. He left his family. He decided to jump for it, go in. And what we read is as soon as he gets to that new place, there's a famine in the land. So as soon as he gets there, we read in Scripture that he now has to journey farther down into Egypt. Here is a man who's following God's call, following God's leading, and yet bumps up against a wall. Then later on we read, of course, the second part is he's called to be a father of many nations, but his wife cannot have children. Another wall that they bump up against. Eventually, they do conceive a child named Isaac, which is Joseph's grandfather. Doesn't take long, and then we read another actually very bizarre story for most of us where Abraham feels God calls him to sacrifice his son Isaac. And that's a difficult one for us in the 21st century because none of us would say that's okay today. It helps to remember that this was a story over 3,000 years ago. There's different ways of interpreting this. Sacrifices were common at that time. Human sacrifices were not as common, but they weren't unheard of. Right? So here is a story that's difficult for us to wrestle with, but is obviously a wall for Abraham and a wall for Isaac and how they walk through that, right? Eventually, Isaac grows up. Abraham, as we know the story goes, doesn't sacrifice Isaac. God actually spares him and says, no, don't do that. Isaac eventually has a son named Jacob. This is Joseph's father. So Jacob, as he grows up, he falls in love with a woman named Rachel. Rachel's father says, hey, you can marry my daughter if you work for me for 7 years. So he's like, okay, I can do that. So he works for him for 7 years to marry the love of his life, only to find that the day after their wedding, he wakes up and, oops, surprise, it's not Rachel. It's Rachel's sister, Leah. The father switched them and said, here, you can have my older daughter, right? Bump up against the wall, what's going on? Then Rachel's father says, hey, you can work for me for another 7 years, and then I'll give you Rachel. Actually, I'll give you Rachel if you promise to work for me for another 7 years. So here he's working 14 years going through that difficult time or that wall. And then when he finally does marry Rachel, Rachel cannot conceive, cannot have children, right? Same struggle as we read about Abraham and Sarah. So there's another wall that they bump up against. Eventually, Rachel does conceive and bears a son named Joseph. So we're walking through that. Hopefully, part of that is realizing that this is found, actually, you could probably pick almost any story in Scripture. Any human journey always reflects a wall, a difficult time. In fact, it's part of any good arc. Any good story will have some sort of, how are they going to get through this? What's going to happen? And that's a part of all of our stories. We're all people who will go through that. In fact, even Jesus, who followed God's leading, went up against a pretty big wall, betrayed, crucified, made fun of. It's a pretty big wall, if you ask me. What is the point of the wall? Well, an easy answer is, of course, the wall strengthens us. We grow through that. But I think even more so, the wall forces us to journey inward. It's an inward journey. It's a time where we ask, who am I? What do I really want? What is my calling, vocation? What is the reason I'm here? What are my priorities? A lot of this has to do with what Pastor Ryan talked about a couple weeks ago with your authentic self or your true self. It's where we grow into that. The wall, I think, is meant to propel us deeper into that, right? I've gone through really just two main walls in my life, and I've shared about them before. I got married, and my wife and I were separated early on the brink of divorce, really struggling. That was a long 1.5 to 2 year struggle. And the second wall that I encountered was actually really a crisis of faith. And it happened as I was feeling called to become a pastor and quit my job and went back to school, Bible college, and dove into theology and spirituality and realized that a lot of the answers that were given to me didn't work. And so it bumped me up against this wall that lasted for really like 3 years of struggling with, I used to believe this certain thing, and now this doesn't work for me. So I actually found that that's true of a lot of people, I think, at One Church, and that's true of a lot of people, I think, across our nation, where that happens, where people bump up into this sort of faith crisis, this wall of the things I was taught no longer work. There was like this box, and now things are jumping out of this box, and what do I do about that? I found something very helpful for me. It was most of the way through. I wish I would have known this before, but I have a short video that I would like us to watch. That really the video is talking about stages of faith, stages of growth, and the stages that we go through in that. And I hope that it'll be helpful for you as we watch it. It's an older video, so it's not as sharp and as clear, but I think the information is really good as we discover what one psychiatrist theory of 4 different stages. Let's watch this together. That's a theory. It's a model. It doesn't necessarily mean it's true. It's a way of looking at growth, spiritual growth. It's a way I found, for me personally, extremely helpful. But I would be interested in hearing your guys' views after. You can tell me what your thoughts are about that. If that is true, and many churches are at stage 2, where do you think most of the Western world is at? Probably, if we're going off of that, stage 3. And then you can see why there's a lot of antagonistic debates and arguments between these two. Going through that, I grew up in a very stage 2 world, and now reflecting, my faith crisis or my wall happened as I was journeying out of that. According to the theory, no stage is good or bad. They're a part of the process, but we're hoping to grow and to mature and walk through that. If there are such a thing as stage 4 people, these would be the people I think have actually journeyed through multiple walls, journeyed deep into them, and have grown because of it. These are the people that we would probably go to and we would say they're very humble and yet deeply spiritual people, right? And again, we talked a little bit about this last week with the story of Joseph. Joseph went through several walls. Last week we talked about him as traumas. This week I think it's perfectly fine to say he walked through different walls. In Joseph, with the story of the coat with many colors, he was thrown into a well by his brothers, walked through that wall. Then he was sold into slavery. Then he was falsely accused of rape and thrown into prison. Then he interpreted someone's dream and was forgotten. Finally, he interpreted Pharaoh's dream and was thrown into basically the second in command of all of Egypt, eventually storing up for the 7 years of good, for the 7 years of famine that were to happen. And his family journeyed down during that time of 7 years of famine. And he bumped up against his brothers and his parents again. And yet we read about a very different man now. Early on, Joseph seems to be a little bit arrogant. He talks about his dreams and his visions of his brothers bowing down to him. And later on, we read this last week, but we can go ahead and it's really short. In Genesis 50, we read a little bit different Joseph. But Joseph said to his family, "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good, in order to preserve a numerous people, as he is doing today. So have no fear. I myself will provide for you and your little ones." In this way, he reassured them, speaking kindly. So we read Joseph seems to have matured, grown, and a part of that is he's more humble. And this is, yeah, you wronged me. You did all of these other things, but now look at, because of that, people are getting food and getting fed, and you guys are getting food and getting fed. I forgive you. I am not God. So we see that his walls actually shaped him into a more humble person. How do we go through a wall? The honest answer is there's no one way to go through a wall or a difficult time. Anyone who says there is, I'd be very skeptical of. Each wall is different. Each person's journey is unique. Peter Scazzaro does say, as far as time-wise, he says it may be months, but it's more probable that it will be a year or 2, maybe more. I know that that's not good news for us. It just means, yeah, a wall is not like a day or a week. A wall takes a while. It's a difficult journey, right? But here's some things I think that will resonate with all of us, some things that will help us through the wall, and that is to find someone to journey with you. When I say someone to journey with you, often it's best to find someone, if you can, who maybe is at a stage 4. Is someone who has walked through that and can create space for you. For me, this was a Methodist pastor who saw me, I think, in fact, he talked about stages of faith as I reflect on that. And he never forced me into anything. He never said, this is what you're doing, it's okay, but he allowed space for questioning. And he held that space, and not forcing me to think or believe anything, but just listened. And that showed me, hey, there's a way to be spiritual, a way to be a person of faith that moves beyond this. And then later on, eventually I found a spiritual director that helped me as well. The second thing is find a community, if you can, a group of people that will journey with you, people that think similarly. If you can at all possible, find someone who's gone through something that's almost identical to you. If you've lost a parent, somebody else who's walked through that will be so helpful for you and for me. And then the third is to engage in a discipline of a spiritual practice, which is extremely difficult when we're going through a wall, because we don't sense God. We're not as motivated to engage in those principles and those practices. I think the big question is not how do we get through the wall, but am I going to journey through the wall, or am I going to turn back? Another way of saying this is, am I going to surrender, or am I going to resist? If you get nothing else out of today, I think this is probably the best thing I got. This is it. This is my big thing. Because I think sometimes we resist or we turn back. And there's a number of ways we can do that. We harden up. We don't go into it, into the depth of it. We don't allow it to break us. We don't take the journey inward, but we just try to make it through. Pull our boots up by our bootstraps, and I'm just going to get over this quick. Right? We try to get it done, get over it quick, and I think that actually produces more pride and more rigid people. I'm sure we all know people who have gone through multiple walls. Some of them, for whatever reason, turn out to be some of the most humble, gentle, open people, and some of them turn out to be some of the most bitter and angry people. And I think a lot of that has to do with how they walk through that wall. Did they resist it, or did they somehow surrender and move into and through that wall? In fact, Peter Scazzaro, he says, turning toward our pain is counterintuitive. But in fact, the heart of Christianity is that the way to life is through death. The pathway to resurrection is through crucifixion. Of course, that's easier said than done, as we all know. In his book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, he talks about another guy who walked through a wall. This person wrote a book called A Grace Disguised, and he lost his mom, his wife, and his little daughter in a car accident, all at once. And in his book, he talks about how he made the decision not to run from the pain, but to walk into the very heart of that darkness and of that pain. And as Peter Scazzaro reflects on that, he says that this person learned that the quickest way to reach the sun and the light of day is not to run west, chasing after it, but to head east, right into the heart of the darkness, and you finally reach the sun. But for me, it's easy when the sun begins to set to be like, no, running after it, chasing after it. It's counterintuitive to turn and to go into the darkness and to experience that, and eventually the sun will come. The last few moments, I'd like to talk about 4 characteristics of what it looks like on the other side of the wall. And I think these are actually really powerful. These are 4 characteristics Peter Scazzaro gives of what it looks like for people on the other side of the wall. And before we begin that part, just realizing, again, I think it's cyclical. We go through many walls in our life. And I think these characteristics are meant to be growth areas. Each time we go through a wall, these characteristics, these places grow inside of us. The first characteristic is a greater level of brokenness, which we've kind of talked about already, is a greater level of brokenness. And as many of us know, Christians can be very judgmental. Going through the wall frees people from this judgmentalism and journeying into that wall. One way Peter Scazzero asks is to ask ourselves how offendable we are, and our beliefs, how offendable if somebody says something to us. Are we easily offendable? As we journey through the wall and go into it, we're less offendable. The second characteristic is a greater appreciation of the holy unknowing or the mystery. If that theory, again, of 4 stages is true, when you're in stage 2, God is easily defined. God is in a box. Everything is in that box. It's very clear, right? But as you journey through life, through stage 3 and stage 4, it blows up that box. It blows up all of those black and white, and now you begin to see gray areas. Maybe it's, for me, like seeing God work outside of my religion and being like, oh my goodness, like this Muslim imam is so loving and compassionate. What do I do to that? And this can happen so many different ways. But here, specifically, it's concerning God and how often we think we know and understand God. And Peter Scazzero, he writes, God is not an object that I can determine, master, possess, or command. In fact, some of the greatest theologians have written about this. St. Augustine is probably one of the most influential theologians in all churches today. He once wrote, if you understand, it is not God that you understand. Another great theologian and thinker, St. Thomas Aquinas, said, this is the ultimate knowledge about God, to know that we do not know. Now, these are great men, intellectual men, educated men, who said, ultimately, we have no idea. We're walking into this great mystery, this great unknowing. In fact, I learned in one of my church history classes in seminary that Thomas Aquinas, who had written tons of theology treatises and arguments and debates, towards the end of his career, he had this experience. Some say it was a mystical experience, but he had this experience that forever changed him. And he stated, I can no longer write, for God has given me such glorious knowledge that all contained in my works are as straw. And he did not write another thing that anybody knows of. So here's a great man who was deep into systematic theology, writing all these beliefs and doctrines, and then finally has this experience that says, you know what? God is so far beyond all of this, right? So part of that is this holy unknowing, realizing that God is so much bigger. The third characteristic is a deeper ability to wait for God, a greater patience. Oftentimes, I struggle to push and to try to force and try to make something happen, or I don't know what will happen, and I just want to know, where are we going to be next year? What's going to happen in 6 months? How is this going to work out? Like, I want to force and push. And when we grow through those walls and we grow spiritually, there's less and less of a need to do that, to let it be. It will unfold in its time. And the fourth is a greater detachment. Peter Scazzero, he writes, a critical issue on the journey with God is not, am I happy, but am I free? When we are overly attached to things, then we are not free, we are bound by them. And that's true, I think, of what we do for a living, the materials we have. That's true, I think, also of our relationships. And as people of faith, it's true even of our beliefs. Are we overly attached to these things? Detachment, Peter Scazzero says, is the great secret of interior peace. Learning that things will change, learning that not everything will be the same. In fact, I have found actually that the Buddhists are probably the best at this idea of detachment. Some people accuse Buddhism of being too passive. And so there's this movement that people are bringing forward called engaged Buddhism, which is how do we bring the precepts and the ideas of Buddhism into the world and engage with it here and now. One of the leaders of that movement is called a man named Thich Nhat Hanh, and he wrote a book called Being Peace. The whole premise was this idea: if we are to bring peace into the world, we must first be peace in order to bring peace. And he wrote this quote here that we're about to read was geared towards those who were setting out to be engaged Buddhists. But I think there's a lot here that we as Christians or people of faith can learn from. So let's read this together. Aware of the suffering created by attachment to views and wrong perceptions, we are determined to avoid being narrow-minded and bound to present views. We shall learn and practice non-attachment from views in order to be open to others' insights and experiences. We are aware that the knowledge we presently possess is not changeless, absolute truth. Truth is found in life, and we will observe life within and around us in every moment, ready to learn throughout our lives. Notice he doesn't say there isn't absolute truth, just simply none of us possess it completely. And when we realize that, then we're open to learning new ways. There's not an attachment. I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything completely. Unfortunately, Christians were some of the worst, I think, at that, right? Christians tend to be very attached to their views. Like, I have the absolute truth. I know who God is, and I know how to get to God. And if you want to come to God, just come talk to me, right? Instead of the humility that says, hey, we're all learning. Truth can be found everywhere. Let's hold this open. It doesn't mean we don't have core convictions, but let's hold it open so we can always learn from other people, not so attached to our views. In closing, I hope some of this was helpful for us as we kind of journey through the wall, and hopefully it will engage some dialogue within us or some thoughts that come up. And in our one groups, we're doing 2 one groups. You're welcome to sign up too, but we engage in these discussions, and hopefully this will at least start some discussions. It's not meant to end the discussions or to give us all the answers, because none of us have all the answers. And so hopefully that will be helpful for us. But as I close, just one final quote of a man who's helped me. He's a pastor, a friend, and a mentor, and he once said that because the wall is also the period of darkness, he said, but in many ways, God's best work is done in the darkness.